Hello, everybody, and welcome to the very first of the 2020 Campus Lisa webinar series virtually. My name is Miguel Rodriguez. I am an educational technology analyst at ATS, and today's topic is all about helping instructors keep teaching in the time of coronavirus. Before we get started, I have a couple of housekeeping things. First of all, this session will be recorded. So it will be available later on campuslisa.ucsd.edu. On top of that, we have a presentation that's a little less than an hour. At the end, we will have questions and we'll bring the audience, we'll take some of the audience questions for Q&A. That being said, we do have a Q&A room. So if you look at the bottom of your Zoom session, you will see the Q&A button. And we have one of our specialists, Matthew Zarzeka, will be in that Q&A room throughout the panel. So we want you to stay engaged and interactive, asking questions. You do not have to hold them to the end. Matthew's in there to engage you and keep that conversation going in parallel to our panel. This will be a panel format with a number of people giving their thoughts about our topic. Remember, everybody will be on mute except for the panelists. And panelists, we know that we're in a special pandemic at-home remote work setting. So, you know, if kids or pets or something distract you, we get it, we understand, and that's okay too. I'm extremely honored because many of my colleagues agreed to talk about this with me. So let's announce who they are. First of all, the Director of Educational Technology Services, Dan Suchy, is joining us. Hi, Dan. We've got 3 educational technology specialists. We've got Deanna Roussin, Ed Ruiz, Laura Fragomeni joining us. We've got the Manager of Multimedia Services, Robin Martin, as well as Senior Educational Technology Specialist, Treb Padula, also joining us. And as mentioned before, with all of you in that Q&A room is Matthew Zarzeka. You'll see his lovely face later on. But before we get to our panelists, we have a question for you. So pretty soon you're going to see a poll pop up. There we are. And I want to know what you thought. As part of campus community, what was your reaction when you first learned that all UC San Diego classes were going to be remote only? And you'll see a couple of options there. Go ahead, you should be able to vote now. And we're gonna give you a few seconds. What were your thoughts? You knew it would be a challenge. IT is more vital. This will fundamentally change education. And we'll give a few more seconds for voting. And then we'll look at the results. All right, let's see. Okay, wow, it's a bit across the board. It looks like, you know, 28% of you said it would be a challenge to help faculty and students pivot. And a good half of you chose that campus IT's mission is suddenly more vital. We thought so as well. And then, you know, all of the above got a good 35%. And it's kind of across the board. That's kind of what I expected. So let me say why I wanted you to think about this first. One of the biggest questions back in early March was, would instructors be able to do this? Would students be able to handle it? Now we know that the answer is, yeah, they were. We survived spring. And I think a lot of that is thanks to the efforts of ATS and ETS, the Academic Technology Services and Educational Technology Services. What I just had you think about is what was going through our minds constantly in March, and frankly goes through our minds all the time. We analyze, we assess, we evaluate, and we train on educational technology tools that are on the front lines for instructors and students. And really, our jobs suddenly were amplified magnificently in March, and it was a crazy time for all of us. So that's what we're going to talk about today, is what we did to address this shift to 100% remote instruction, how it went, and how we're going to make it even better for the fall. Before we hear from the rest of the team, I want to hear from Dan first. Dan, you were the first to know that this was going to happen, and you called an emergency meeting. You told us that we had to have a comprehensive one-stop shop resource for instructors to know how the heck they were going to teach remotely in the first place. And I want to know what went through your head at that time and what you thought. We had like 2 days to create this. So what did you think of the product?
That's a great question, Miguel. And first off, thanks a lot to you and for the Campus Leads planning committee for letting us kick off Campus Leads. I'm really excited about it. So to answer your question, I really need to go back to a date that is burned into my memory, both professionally and personally, and a lot of your all memory too, and that's March 10th. That's the day that Chancellor Coleslaw announced kind of a pretty sweeping, dramatic series of restrictions on campus events. You know, there was no more sports, no more gatherings, no more campus events. And at the time, academically, it was the last week of winter quarter. So classes were still in session. It's a critical, for those of you that know, and a lot of you do, that's a pretty critical week in an academic quarter. It's right before finals. And at the time, classes were still to be in person, believe it or not. So that was the plan. But honestly, I could see the COVID writing on the wall. I knew my IT colleagues here and IT colleagues here on campus could see the writing on the wall, and things were just going to deteriorate from here. So we all knew we had to get ahead of classes on campus being asked to vacate. We knew that was going to happen. And even if we had just a small window of time, every hour is pretty important. So along with my boss, Valerie, we called an emergency staff meeting. It was great to get everybody together. In fact, that's the last time we've had that group together in months. And I really look forward to having everyone back together again at some point. So things were moving quickly. The pandemic situation was deteriorating by the day, like I said. And we knew right off the bat what that meant for our students and faculty was that they were going to need some place to get guidance. This isn't a nice to have in this scenario. This is a critical need. So the Keep Teaching webpage was just one of the things we turned around quickly in response. And it's a good example of what happens when you come together around rapid work, long days and some long nights. And I know I can't see you all out there, but when I say long days and long nights, there's probably some nodding heads because a lot of us worked our butt off for several months straight. And just overall amazing collaboration by folks in this panel, teams in ITS and the IT campus community. So I just want to give a shout out to ITS's Catherine Collins, who couldn't be on the panel today, but she was also instrumental in making this happen. So to be clear, the driver was first off to make sure our students and faculty could answer those basic questions. They were coming to us with things like, how can I do this? Can I do this? Can I continue classes? How can I keep teaching? How can I keep learning? So really fundamental questions that they were looking to IT to help answer. So the webpage, which is amazing, the first phase of it was simply to triage folks through an emergency situation. The next phase really was to go from can I do this to how can I do this? So how can I make the best of a remote instruction situation that none of us planned for, none of us asked for? And then really that's kind of where we're at now. And then the next phase of Keep Teaching webpage is a complete redesign in conjunction with the Teaching and Learning Commons, which if we had had the time and the knowledge, we probably would have done from the onset. So that's the next phase. And so just to sum it all up, Miguel, briefly, I guess what I've really discovered from all this is that what you're capable and what your team, your colleagues are capable of when you come together around a crisis. And COVID-induced remote instruction, that was definitely our crisis. And I hope to heck it never happens again. I feel like campus IT as a whole really came together and met the challenge.
COVID-induced remote instruction. I think that's the first time I've heard it used in that way. At the first, it was called educational continuity, and we went with Keep Teaching, I think, because it was easier to swallow. But it is definitely an educational continuity contingency plan that we came up with at the beginning. And so, Dan, thank you so much for sharing those thoughts. It's always good to know what's going on in your head as we are kind of working behind the scenes and we get our noses into the actual work. And the work that your team has done. And speaking of your team, so let's have everybody else join us again to varying extents. The faces you're seeing popping up on your screen were involved in this process. We'll hear more from Deanna about her involvement later too. But Deanna, if you have thoughts at this point, feel free to share them. But right now, what we're going to talk about is Dan giving us this job to do, a 2-day project to build essentially what should have taken it 2 years to build, and the Keep Teaching page. So team, particularly team on the ed tech side, you were told to create this comprehensive one-stop shop for instructors. How did you go about what tools to include, how advanced you were going to make your tutorials, and what the structure of the page would be? We can start with you, Ed.
So I think the tools were pretty much determined from the onset. The email that the chancellor sent out to faculty really pushed for the use of Canvas to deliver, teaching materials online and or remotely. And then, so that was pretty much a given. So we need to include that. Plus that is sort of our flagship product in EdTech. So that was a big one. The next thing was, how are we going to do lectures? How are we going to deliver lectures? So there were two options for that. There was the live option, synchronous sessions. So that would be Zoom. So we knew that we were going to include that. And then the third one was for any sort of recorded sessions or, that instructors wanted to use. And for that, we're going to use Kaltura, which is known as My Media or Media Gallery in Canvas. So those were the three tools that we started off with. And then I think there was a lot of back and forth in terms of what aspects to use, but we assumed that, there are a lot of people that still hadn't used Canvas, Zoom, or Kaltura. So we wanted to provide very basic information, enough to get them up and running, nothing fancy. And so that's where our focus was basic information for those three tools. You're muted.
I've done the classic Zoom faux pas. Laura, I'd like you to talk a little bit about you and I talked a lot about how to structure the page, the actual terminology we're going to use. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for asking about that. So as Ed just alluded to, we knew that a lot of people who were going to be using this page really hadn't used any of these tools before. Canvas, prior to March 10th or the beginning of spring quarter, was not a required tool, and then all of a sudden it was. And so we knew our audience was a group of instructors, teachers, not technologists, and not necessarily people who were thinking about, okay, how will I use technology in my instruction, even in a live or in-person setting? What they were thinking about is, how do I get materials to my students? How do I make sure that they know what to do each week? How do I give assignments? How do I assess? Going through their pedagogical checklist. And so we landed on, we're going to structure this page with those instructional tasks in mind, front and center. And so those ended up being our headings. This is what you need to do. You need to deliver a lecture. Here are the tools available. You need to give an assignment. Here are the tools available. You need to give an assessment. Here are the tools, and really built from there, which allowed then our instructors to be instructors and find what they needed based on what they needed to do in that moment.
Before I ask this next question, I'm very happy to say I'm seeing more attendees pop up, so I'm going to reiterate what I said before. The Q&A section is open. Matthew Zarzeka is on hand to answer your questions. So, any questions you have right now, you can feel free to ask them in the Q&A right now, and you guys can upvote, or y'all can upvote each other's questions, so we can see actually what's really popular in terms of the questions you have. But yeah, keep that Q&A going. For the Keep Teaching page, I do want to know, when it was launched and when we got the word out to instructors, what was some of the feedback we started getting from instructors?
Very good question.
Thinking about it, Ed?
Yeah, I'm thinking about it. I mean, so I at the time was really focused on going to departments. A lot of departments were asking for us to go out and do presentations for their faculty. They were trying to figure out sort of the limits of things. Will Zoom be able to handle my 500-person lecture? That kind of stuff. who else can help me? Can I have co-hosts? There were those kinds of questions, a lot of sort of more the logistical stuff as opposed to the pedagogical stuff that Laura was talking about previously. And so there were conversations about, a lot of it was, we don't really know, because this is kind of new territory for us. And, so we did sort of walk them through, this is how you request, a Zoom license at the time, because we had licenses as opposed to the site-wide option, to say, go to this link, request for large groups, do this, do that, refer to this. So a lot of it, at least what I was dealing with was logistical in nature.
I'd like Robin and or Treb to jump in here, because part of the Keep Teaching page, very important part, in fact, was a tool called Kaltura, which it's essentially a media hosting tool to host videos. And for asynchronous instruction especially, we needed those videos. And since it became essential, even when instructors were going to have an asynchronous lecture, we needed an asynchronous option for students who couldn't make it to campus. Kaltura was a big piece of this, and that is a lot your baby. So think about Kaltura's use back in March. What do you remember?
Yeah, for sure. Just to expand on one more thing too that Ed was just talking about. We had a series of Zoom workshops, and essentially emergency Zoom workshops to get people up and running, right, for spring. And that the questions that we got in those sessions then informed FAQs and additional content that we added to the website. These were also some instructors' first encounters with Zoom. So it was also teaching them a lot of how to navigate the interface, how to get around. So hard to imagine at this point, but people not being familiar with Zoom, because it's become such, a daily part of our lives at this point. But at one point in March, it really was brand new. And a crucial part of that Zoom integration and setup on campus was the integration with Kaltura. So in mid-March, a couple days after that initial closure, as we headed into spring, we actually enabled an integration that Deanna had researched and set up for us to make it so that Zoom cloud recordings automatically went over into Kaltura. So trying to streamline the process of content getting into Canvas as much as possible for these instructors that are trying to juggle all these new technologies already. And so really trying to make that a streamlined process. As a result of that, and as a result of all the additional usage of Kaltura in spring, we saw over 100,000 entries uploaded into this system during spring quarter, which dwarfs our usage for the prior year and a half of kind of starting to set up the tool and implement it. It was used at a very minimal basis. And for those that felt like time in quarantine has been passing slowly, according to our stats, we had 8 years of video content uploaded to Kaltura in spring. So there's a data point for you for your for time feeling like it's passing a little bit oddly. 8 years passed within 1 quarter in terms of Kaltura video.
Yeah, that's mind-blowing. Treb, do you have anything to add to that in terms of the video or that kind of media space?
Well, actually, not even just the media space, but one thing we found early on when we were trying to figure out, just wrap our heads around how we were going to look at this, one of the things that came up was the student responses systems that we have, like clickers in classrooms and things like that. And a lot of questions that came up was, how do we create that dynamic interaction or that engagement in a remote session? And even now we're looking at asynchronous and all those other things, but at the moment it was just, how do we use Zoom and still make it feel like a classroom? And that was where we had to really look at the features that were in Zoom, what the capabilities were for polling and those type of things that we hadn't even played with in Zoom. Those of us who had actually been using it, been playing with it a little bit, how to do that. And also kind of re-looking at Canvas and the other pieces of the puzzle that we owned to give people an idea of how to still create like a question and answer and some kind of reflection options without focusing on that in class, that moment, that at that same moment experience, like how to do things outside of that. And we got a lot of help from Ed and from other people in the team to looking at what options we could give instructors without forcing them down one path, but just saying, here are the other things that we could do so that we could link to that with the Keep Teaching, with our Clicker website and with some other pieces to give people at least some options and know where to go. Cause this was all brand new for us. Like it was, uncharted waters.
So we're doing pretty great on time. I'm just curious, Deanna, we are going to talk to you a little bit about your return to work, but I am wondering, back in March, it's not like you had complete blinders on. I'm wondering, when you were at home on maternity leave, how much were you kind of asking us or paying attention to what we were going through?
I think once the new news articles started to come out about colleges may not be going to campus anymore, that's kind of when I was like, hold on, I think I need to check in with work. And so I was due to come back to campus on April 2nd. However, I started to pay more attention to what our team was working on probably towards the end of February, and kind of was like, where is this going? What is this doing? Because when I left for maternity, we were on a good path to get 100% Canvas adoption. I left when Canvas was 61% adopted, and I was anticipating when I came back, it would be about 80%. But I remember having the thought, I'm like, I wonder if COVID will help push us to 100% adoption rate. And at the time, I thought I was being funny. I thought I was being joking, but you saw how serious this became. And within a matter of, it was actually that day that I learned that the team had a conversation that things were planning to go remote. And so it was definitely something else.
Yeah, and especially because of having a uniform design, Canvas was especially, basically mandated, you know?
Yes.
It definitely helped convince people to jump on in. It was a very interesting March for us, that's for sure. So far, this has been a great conversation, and everything we've been talking about is about taking tools that we already knew, tools that we already had trainings for, tools that we knew how to teach to instructors, and make a page that was concise that could get instructors going right away. In a way that was a huge challenge, but it was also kind of the easy part. There were some other challenges, and that was, what do we do with the things that we have to invent from scratch? So I'm going to talk a little bit about some things that are new, that were invented in response to the pandemic. And then I'm going to let Robin and Treb talk about something that had been invented but had to be rethought. So what I want to talk about right now is I'm going to take a few minutes to discuss courses that require specialized software that uses one of almost 200 on-premises computer labs on campus. These are very well-used lab spaces that suddenly were no longer available. And this was a major concern. What are we going to do with all these courses that need these crazy software and specialized software that's out there? And that solution ended up becoming something called CloudLabs. And so the labs team, when Dan talked earlier about working day and night, I mean, it really applies to the labs team on this project, which again, by rights should have taken years and was, ready to go. There was no time for a pilot. We just launched it in 2 weeks' time. And this is what it is. So most of the software, and we're talking hundreds of pieces of large software, were placed in a variety of virtual environments. We had Amazon, Aporto, Horizon View. There were some pieces of software that could not be virtualized in environments like that. And so we also provided, via Guacamole, remote access to physical computers that were sitting on campus labs. So there were a lot of different solutions. This is not a one-stop shop thing. Depending on what you needed, that's what you were provisioned for. And I wanted to give a very quick demo of what a student's experience would be like accessing this software in a remote environment. So I am going to share my screen, and I'm going to show CloudLabs. So CloudLabs looks like this. It's cloudlabs.ucsd.edu, and instructors would request access to certain pieces of software. We would provision that course in whatever environment was appropriate. So for example, here's an environment called Aporto. Now, Aporto is an environment I'm going to go in. And I was in earlier, I have to reconnect. So when a student connects to Aporto, this is what it looks like. So right now I am in just my web browser. And through the web browser, I'm essentially looking at a computer's desktop with all of this specialized software. Just because on my computer, I don't have FEMAP or SolidWorks or MATLAB or COMSOL or any number of PuTTY. There are other software that's included in here too. Now I can use it. Now I have access to it virtually through this virtual machine environment. And we have Amazon. We've got a couple of different options here. And in 2 weeks, hundreds of pieces of software were tested, uploaded, and created in these virtual environments called CloudLabs. So I can't stress enough how much work the labs team did and what an amazing job they did and are still doing as we're learning from what happened in fall and start gearing it up as it happened in spring and we start gearing up for fall. But yeah, that's CloudLabs in a very brief nutshell. It's a huge project in a very brief nutshell. So if anybody out there has any instructors who need lab resources, CloudLabs is a suggestion you want to give them for fall for sure. But I want to give Robin some time to talk right now because there's another major project that had to be reassessed called Studio U.
Yeah, thanks, Miguel. So Studio U is a self-service recording space on campus in the APNM building where most of us in ETS are located that we designed to address some needs of video production on campus. There are multiple video groups on campus, including my team that assists faculty and other academic users with creating video content. But there's a cost associated with that for labor, for equipment, things like that. So we know not everybody can afford to pay that cost. It also takes time to develop, it takes time to edit the videos afterwards. So we really wanted to make a no cost, minimal effort, minimal time investment way for people to create video content quickly for their labs that was something better quality than you would get off of just a regular Zoom recording, for instance. It's also a great way for people to learn how to get comfortable in front of a camera, learn how to present content effectively in a video format. So Treb and Jordy on my team, along with a couple of other members, really went out, looked at what was out there in the industry, SDSU, UC Davis, Penn State, other types of solutions, and really came up with something innovative and new. So I'm going to let him talk about what we did to change that. But for folks that want to learn a little bit more or hear a little bit more about Studio U, there's an award that rhymes with otter that folks might be familiar with that you can hear about more at UC Tech next week. So Treb, if you would talk a little bit about what we did with Studio U and also what we had to change as we moved into remote.
Thank you, Robin. Yeah, we one of the main things we wanted to do was when we looked at a lot of the other schools, we wanted to actually create a space where people could come in and record, but not have to work on the video afterwards. We were finding that no matter where it was being recorded, they were all recording with green screens and then doing some kind of editing afterwards or having to export the video from, if anyone's used Camtasia or any of these other things, or even now that we're doing these kind of recordings, even the exporting that Zoom does, are waiting for videos to show up. We wanted something that they could leave the room knowing how their product would look at the end. And so luckily we had such a team of producer directors who worked well with software from companies like Blackmagic and everything, these actual production studio switches and doing live green screening. And so we were able to tie the AV controls that we were used to using in classrooms and in other spaces and use those to actually run studio switches and studio controls as if a person were there, so that the instructors can hit one button, say that they want to do a green screen, choose the background they would like from a list of from some backgrounds, or even just use our standard one and get a finalized product that looks like what you see as standards on YouTube, on education websites. That, like one of the common ones we saw was that over the shoulder, you'd have the video over their shoulder, nice background behind them. And that was really something that we wanted to create to make it easy for instructors so they could have those types of things. Like the moment they left, they hit stop, it's on a thumb drive and they can leave. One of our biggest problems has been, even though the room is designed self-service, you assume that means that it doesn't require anyone else to help you or to anyone else to touch it. With COVID, we've had to relook at the room because it does require us to set the room up or help people who are new learn the space. So we've taken this time to really get a procedure down for how we want to clean the room and prepare the room and sanitize the room, and even give some time in between people using it so people feel comfortable and safe using the room. This is a space that you have to use with the mask off, or you would use with a mask off, which is something we're not used to now when we're outside of our houses and when we're in a public space. So because of that, we're limiting the use to the room to one person in the room at a time. We're only doing sessions, and we're just starting this now. We haven't been running it long, but we're just starting to test out having openings in the morning and then an opening in the afternoon so that people could come in the morning. We can clean in between that person and the next person, let the room air out for a little bit, and then let someone use the room in the afternoon. We've got several large projects that we're trying to help with the online initiatives and with people trying to prepare for the fall classes in general. So that's something that we're working with, prepping the room and having that. We've also added an intercom to the room so we can speak to them from outside of the room. We have a camera in the room to see them, and we can control the system a little bit with some of the remote controls we've added. So this way we actually had a successful filming yesterday where an instructor was in the room. I spoke to him through an intercom system and walked him through the system without actually being in the room, which was a very nice change and made everyone comfortable in the situation, not having to be in the same room with each other. So those are some of the features we've been adding and some of the reasons for it.
The instructor was alone in the room in that situation, Treb?
Yes, the instructor was given an access code to the room. They walked into the room. I said hello to them when they came in because I can see them come in with the camera. And then we interacted back and forth a little bit with a little refresher on how to use the room and walked him just through some of the questions and everything, and then let him go and use the space on his own where he could get back to me if he needed.
So if anybody... Oh, I'm sorry, Robert.
I was just one last point on that too. These are upgrades that we had planned to make to the room eventually, long term. But as with this kind of recurring theme that we're having here, we moved quickly and were able to really pilot something, get into place on a very accelerated time scale, thanks to my team's work, to make it so that we could provide non-contact, live, synchronous support of the room and really help people get comfortable and make sure they're successful in their video projects.
Yeah, it's been pretty huge, and the products are very polished. So I wanted to give you a chance, if people want to see an example of what can be created in Studio U, you have examples up on your site, right?
Correct, yeah. For more information, go to studiou.ucsd.edu, and Studio U is spelled S-T-U-D-I-O-U.
Like university.
You got it.
Yeah. All right. So, those are some of the things that we've had to innovate, as well as, reassess what we've been using in the past. Where we're going to take the conversation now is looking at how spring went, how we're doing over the summer, and then we're going to look to the future too. And we've got fall coming up really, really quickly, and we want to make sure that we're prepared for that. So I want to bring Deanna back because Deanna has, again, we talked about this a little bit already, but Deanna has a unique outlook of returning from maternity leave in the middle of remote work. You still haven't been back to the office, I don't think. So you talked about how the pandemic made 100% Canvas pickup, but how has Canvas changed? How has work changed? What kinds of things have you noticed that are different now?
What I'm very grateful for is actually the technology that we had been testing and piloting and kind of slowly introducing to the community, that we had already done that part. So we were ready to push those tools out. So one of them, Robin was talking about them earlier, was Kaltura. The other thing was Zoom that we had put in, but these products were never really pushed to the instructors because when we're doing Canvas trainings, we're saying, we don't expect you to know all this information all at once. Add a new technology tool quarter by quarter so you're not overwhelmed with these tools. Then all of a sudden our faculty members were pushed into COVID and had to use these resources. So like Robin was saying, the one missing piece that we had come March was that one little bit of automatically transferring those Zoom recordings, those Zoom cloud recordings directly into Kaltura. And I think that has been a huge lifesaver for our faculty members because they don't have to worry about downloading it and then re-uploading into another product. So for when I came back, I mean, I visited the team on March 11th, so the day after Dan's March 10th, and I could tell that everything was changing. And so I think, you know, when I came fully back at home to work, the team really had carried on everything well. And I thought I was need to go in full speed, but I was very surprised and ecstatic to see how well our faculty actually adapted to the technology. And it's because that work our team did with the Keep Teaching page and all the trainings we did before during summer in order to help just increase Canvas usage. So all that preparation that we did just because really helped for COVID.
I'm going to activate Ed and Laura again, because so far we've talked a lot about what we did that pretty much went well and you know, how we were able to succeed. But as we go into fall, I think we could learn just as much or more for some of the unanticipated challenges that we had. So I don't know, let's start with you, Ed. Like, what are some things, despite all the planning that was done, that kind of threw an obstacle into our way?
I think some of the things that were things that were out of our control. So for example, Google at the time had plans to do some security updates that could have had big impacts on how students connected between systems, you know, and Canvas does a lot of connections of different systems and different applications. So that could have potentially been pretty ugly, but they had decided to roll back. They decided to hold off on some of those changes, so that we were thankful for. They have since pushed out those changes, and it doesn't seem like it was that big an impact, thankfully. But that was definitely someplace where you know, we were kind of finding out things like, oh, they're planning to do this, or this is happening, and we had to figure out how to work with that. I think in terms of unanticipated challenges, it wasn't so much technical, but more human. You know, sort of expectations. I mean, I think people were prepared for, you know, some slowdowns and things like that, but I don't think people were really prepared for the extent that we faced around bandwidth limitations and things like that. The fact that everyone, you know, their partners, their kids, you know, everyone was using the internet. And so that was really slowing down things. And so we had to, a lot of times, you know, respond to emails about, you know, where is this? Why isn't this happening? Why is this person being kicked off? And so I think we, you know, will want to sort of take that into consideration and sort of how do we warn people? How do we sort of work around those kind of challenges? And yeah, so that's what I'm thinking about for fall.
Why isn't my 3-hour lecture video in Kaltura yet?
Yeah. And in some instances, it took about, you know, sometimes 2 days for it to appear, especially early on, because Zoom became the it product for a while, you know, and they, I don't know that they were really prepared for the onslaught that came their way.
Laura, you came on board largely at the beginning for a product called OpenEdX, or I should say, oh gosh, what are we calling it, Ed?
UCSD Online.
UCSD Online. UCSD. Sorry, Karen Flammer. UCSD Online. And you've kind of over the last couple of months also evolved to be like the Zoom expert. I want you to talk a little bit about Zoom, because that definitely had some unintended consequences.
Yeah, let's talk about Zoom. So I loved at the beginning, Miguel mentioned that a big part of our job is to know our tools back to front, be really well trained on them, and therefore be able to provide support. And Deanna mentioned that we had Zoom integrated into Canvas. So we had the LTI, or the piece of software that tied the two tools together. However, prior to March 10th, like March 9th, Zoom itself was not educational technology, it was workplace technology, and was the main purview of the e-signature team, which is part of WTS, and not something that we interact or supported at all. And really our team's whole extent of use was, you know, we would jump on a Zoom meeting when we were working from home, or one day a week of working from home. And then, you know, we all went remote, and Zoom was the way that instructors were delivering their lectures, whether they were doing it live with all of their students or primarily just using it for recording. It was the main way that everyone was getting their lecture content out. So overnight, it did become educational technology, and we started getting tickets, requests, training requests, and really rapidly had to learn the tech without training, mostly by troubleshooting. Whenever we got a ticket, I'm having this problem, what do I do? And so that was a really big challenge, really not even knowing, you know, what should we be able to, and what should we anticipate? What are we going to need to support our instructors with, just from not having had the experience. So that was a huge unanticipated challenge. Another was because really, I mean, we went overnight. Our entire faculty, staff, and student body all of a sudden had a Zoom Pro account, and those accounts were provisioned by another team, by the e-signature team, not the Canvas team. And like I mentioned before, like Deanna, sorry, had mentioned, we did have this tool that was integrating the two. And we had no way of knowing that so in some cases, the email addresses that were used to provision the Zoom accounts were going to be different from the email addresses that were used to provision Canvas. And therefore those tools didn't end up being able to talk to each other, which we found out when people then notified us they can't get into Zoom LTI Pro. So we had to do discovery and figure out what the problem was, and then learn to resolve that problem. As soon as we were able to, and workplace technology, e-signature really has been tremendously helpful in this. As soon as we were able to figure out what to do, they really quickly able to turn around and solve that problem for anyone who ends up having it. But that was certainly something that we were not anticipating either. And then, like we were mentioning earlier, Zoom itself as a company was experiencing incredible growth in its user base that could never have thought would happen and was not prepared for. And they themselves were scrambling to make software updates in order to solve the problems of their users that happened overnight. One of which being Zoom bombing, which I remember the first probably week of spring quarter, you know, after work one day, just like really reading the news. That was, you know, during that time, just glued to the news, and seeing an article, my first article with the word Zoom bombing in it, is describing this phenomenon. And then being like, oh, I wonder if this is going to affect us, coming to work the next day, and it absolutely was affecting us. So then we needed to think about security and how do we support our instructors, making sure that their meetings with their classes are secure. Nothing we could have ever anticipated before we got there.
Yeah, we had to actually go back on some of our recommendations.
Yes.
In response to Zoom bombing, which
yes.
That's hard to do.
Yes. So to wrap all of that up into an optimistic note, we learned a lot in a very short period of time. We now have, you know, been able to prevent a lot of the problems that we may have seen, you know, in the fall if we didn't have this experience in the spring. We're able to help people set up their classes before the term starts so that they know, you know, they have all their meetings scheduled, they are scheduled securely, they're set up securely. All they have to do is hit a button. It's going to be automatically recorded. It's going to automatically be added to My Media and Canvas, and then they'll know how to publish. So it should be a lot smoother that way. We'll know how to help anyone who has any issues with their accounts or their emails. And we certainly have learned a lot more ourselves about when people have particular struggles or issues that they need troubleshooting or solutions for. So ticket turnaround time is also a lot faster. Zoom, we also know to be paying really close attention to their updates because we know that they can push them out very quickly and force some changes that we need to be aware of. And Zoom itself, I think, has also done a tremendous job of listening to customer feedback and user feedback, and has you know, gotten a lot better at communicating and making things optional and making sure that they're doing things on the right timeline for their users. So we are in a much better position moving forward to fall.
Yeah, sometimes their updates will just make it not work. I'm just curious, how many of you, and you can just raise your hand, experienced Zoom bombing firsthand? Am I the only one? Okay, me and Dan. All right. Yeah, that was not fun. So I'm glad that we were able to, or Zoom was able to do things, and we were able to work quickly to make that, it did happen to some instructors, but not to the extent I think that we were afraid of. And I'm glad about that. Now, Deanna and I did a training on it specifically that went really well. We've got about 5 more minutes, and I do want to hear from Treb and possibly Robin again. So we're going into fall, and they're proposing 30%. Well, right now, according to the registrar, we've got 30% of our courses either hybrid or some form of on-campus instruction. So can you talk about the classroom technology piece of that?
Yeah, I would like to, thank you, Miguel. I'd like to take a moment to really compliment and thank our classroom support team. While many of us are talking about working remotely and working from home, the classroom support team hasn't gone home. I mean, they haven't started working from home. They became essential employees when this started, which is crazy to think of when this is a team that you wouldn't have thought of when you're thinking of essential. But at the start, even when we started looking at the end of winter, and we didn't know what spring was going to look like, they started working overtime to put 25 more cameras, 20 plus cameras in the classrooms, thinking that instructors would want to podcast more from their classes. No students in the room, or students wouldn't be showing up. And so they were starting to prep ahead of time to say, how can we increase our podcast capability so students could see the instructors or see writing on the board, things that we were thinking. Then as things quickly evolved, and this is a moving target like we talk about regularly, as things changed, they started looking at how they could even add more features to the room, looking at the situation we're in now. And they have started looking at fall and started planning to not only add those cameras, there were now the goal and the plan, and they're on track for it, is to actually have 50 tracking cameras in our classrooms, which is half of our registrar's space. And you think about this, and so they will have those tracking cameras, and on top of that, they're adding the capability, and they have already added the capability of Zoom to work from those rooms. So instructors plugging in one USB cable into their computer along with what they would normally be using in the classroom, they can now select the classroom as their camera and their microphone. And that room is now being sent out to Zoom. So now we have the live, synchronous, asynchronous blended together. And this was a large effort and a lot of work. And it could have cost a lot of money, but they actually took the time to look at the equipment that they've been using as they've been changing the classrooms and refreshing. And they looked at a unique way to reuse some older equipment and to really give us a high quality video output into Zoom instead of cobbling together a system that would have just cost us money and may not be used later. This is a way that they've integrated it into the classrooms and put it as part of what the design moving forward, so that this is going to be available in all the rooms and a standard. They've actually redone the control systems for it so that it'll be usable for the instructors and kind of user friendly, and added some help functions and some features that will help instructors move along, like we talked about before, in a remote session, so that they don't need as much help. So these are things that they've done, that they started in winter, pushed through, been working through spring, and they have just been going strong all summer to really get the rooms up and running so that this solution is available for them. Originally, we thought it would be interesting, we would be separating rooms or sending content from one room to the next, and we realized that would limit us too much. And so now the idea is just to send it out via Zoom so that students from anywhere could still see the class as if they were in an overflow situation.
A lot of that is amazing. And like a lot of the things we've been talking about, including CloudLabs and the stuff that has been built out, what's interesting to me is this is stuff that just a few months ago, we were talking about, like, in a part of a 10-year plan, or wouldn't it be nice if, with the idea that it was something in the future that we would try to build out, and suddenly, boom, now we're going to have it.
Parts of this were actually on our plans for 2 years from now. I mean, like, you were definitely right. Like, this was on what we would talk about when we finish this current refresh, things that we saw coming down the line. And Zoom was something we saw the writing on the wall a while back, and this was something we were looking at. But this huge update and this huge change it was done far before we were planning for it, and before we actually had a great idea of how we would do it. But they did a wonderful job really coming up with a unique way to do it and simplifying the process.
Yeah.
And one more brief note. Sorry, if I may. One more brief note just on this kind of accelerated process that's going on that's affecting all these various projects and plans. I have to give a shout out to Kieran Flammer's digital learning team and the Teaching and Learning Commons, who's been a partner with us all along the way. They are really point people for a lot of faculty questions, even before they get to our teams for Canvas or Kaltura or whatever. They know a lot there about all these tools and best practices. We've been working with them over the summer to also prepare about a dozen online courses that are supposed to launch in fall and winter. That's not typical. I'll just leave it at that. That's a very compressed time scale. A lot of work goes into these, and this is not something that normally would have happened without this big push to try to deliver quality instruction in a remote fashion. That is what we can truly call online learning, not just emergency rote instruction or COVID-inspired remote instruction. So there's a lot of that effort that's going on as well to do pre-recorded content, not just capturing synchronous content.
So I wish we could just keep going. Well, I don't actually, because I do want to address our audience. But before we do that, I'm wondering, Dan, do you have any final thought now that you've heard your team talk so much?
No, I really don't. I think everybody covered things pretty well, and I'm looking forward to tackling these questions.
Darn right. So we're going to bring up our conduit to our audience, Matthew Zarzeka. Hi, Matt. You've been in the Q&A, hopefully having some conversations. Let's hear what we've got.
Absolutely. A great panel, great conversation, and that's brought about some great questions from our attendees. So I brought about 8 in total that I want to get through if we can, and I'm just going to read through these based on those thumbs ups that people gave. One of the first questions we got was from Rachel Lapides. What do you see as the optimal relationship between ETS and the departmental faculty tech advisors? So what sort of relationship is preferred between those two groups, all of our ETS group and those tech advisors from those departments?
That's a whole webinar.
Yeah, it might be.
Dan, I think you should start that one.
Sure, I'll try to be brief too if people want to chime in. So what Rachel's referring to is basically a group of faculty who are particularly passionate about teaching of technology, who are asked by our EVC to come together in a consultative role with their teaching colleagues to help them through this remote situation. So that's what that is. I really see ETS's role is technology consultation to the tech advisors. We can help them with what is possible right away, what will take some time to enable. Also, we're good at the things that faculty necessarily aren't good at or don't want to do, like procurement, integration, training, things like that we can handle. So it frees the faculty up to do what they're best, and that's teaching, and that is to share best practices with their fellow faculty.
If I can piggyback on that too, I know I shouldn't talk so much, but I want to mention privacy and security as another thing that we do that faculty aren't necessarily thinking about at the fore with educational technology. But absolutely, we're more on the technology side. And like Robin mentioned earlier with Teaching and Learning Commons, the strength of those faculty consultants is the pedagogy. So that's really really it should be a partnership.
Great. Another question from another Rachel Hassett. There actually was a lot of great questions about CloudLab when you had that conversation. I think a lot of people were interested in it. From Rachel Hassett, are there any issues for international students staying abroad being able to access Canvas, CloudLab, Kaltura, etc.?
Do you want that one, Ed?
Sure. You know, in terms of Canvas, students abroad have been able to access it successfully, and that hasn't been an issue. My understanding is the same for Kaltura, where there hasn't been, particularly in China, that's usually been a lot of the questions that we get, or are the students in China, are they able to access these two particular ones? And the answer is yes, so far. We have not run into any issues. Who knows what the future holds? Hopefully not. I will say, and it's not included in the question, but there are some questions about what's going to happen with Zoom. Zoom has taken some big steps in recent days about how they conduct their business in China. They are stepping back. They're going through partners, for example. I think our university should be okay because kind of what Zoom was talking about at the time was not doing free accounts anymore or just being able to log in. So I think it's going to become more crucial for fall that we're making sure that students abroad are signing in to Zoom with their AD credentials to make sure that they're gaining access, if I understand everything that's been going on in the news. So I don't know if Robin or Laura want to jump in about that in particular, but that's the one that I'm, keeping an eye on.
I think we'll go to the next question.
Great. This is another kind of big question that probably could be talked about for a while. From Bill Homan, does the fall quarter create new challenges with the incoming students? I guess perhaps more so than they would have in any other new regular fall, but with everything on top of that.
I'm going to also say for this question, record enrollment in the fall. Who wants to take that puppy? That sounds like a Dan question too.
I'll just say a couple of things. So challenges, some are going to be the same. We have new students who, for a lot of this technologies, they're going to have to learn just like our winter and spring students did. So it's going to be a repeat for us. I think a challenge for us as IT providers is simply the amount of help people are going to need, right? We're normally crushed during the fall, during normal times. Now we're going to be especially crushed because we're going to have new faculty, new students who need to kind of help from the start. I don't know if anyone else has anything to add to that.
Yeah, I'll just jump in a little bit because one of the questions that came up a lot as we were preparing to go into spring was, how do I get students to submit handwritten work? And it's such a simple question, but it's not necessarily the simplest answer. So a lot of instructors have just had their students snap a picture and upload that, and thankfully Canvas can accommodate that kind of upload. Some of them have to scan in forms. So do students need to get scanners now? I don't know, but I think some of the sort of way that we used to do things, of collecting things on paper, is where some of those basic challenges may start appearing at the beginning for new students.
We might have time for one more, Matt. Maybe.
I'm gonna combine two here. Those are CloudLab related. Does CloudLabs work on Chromebooks? And the other question is, I remember hearing that some of the software packages in CloudLabs was expiring. In this case, Adobe. Have there been negotiations to make those available for fall?
All right, so I'll very briefly address the first one. So CloudLabs is a completely cloud-based system. So I will say that what I've seen so far, the answer is yes. Internet connection, web browser compatibility, you can log into CloudLabs and it's worked pretty well. I have a Chromebook and I've done a couple of things, but I will caveat by saying my personal testing with CloudLab software on a Chromebook is very limited. However, it's an internet-based, cloud-based system, so yes, largely it is working on Chromebooks. Yay! The Adobe thing, it's all right.
Miguel, can I jump in real quick with the Chromebook compatibility issue? Because it might be compatible with CloudLabs, but there are other integrations that don't work. So for example, if instructors are going to be using a proctoring tool called Respondus, Chromebook is not going to work for that. And so there might be some other integrations, other third-party tools out there that are either integrated into Canvas or used alongside with Canvas where Chromebook is not going to be an option. So instructors should really take a look at what they plan to use and hopefully try to, make it as universally available, choose something that's universally available to everyone regardless of OS.
And as much as I would love to go into the problem of Adobe Creative Cloud, which is definitely an issue, you're free to email me, mdrodriguez@ucsd.edu, and I'll talk your ear off about Adobe. But unfortunately, we're out of time. We literally could be here for hours more talking about instruction because we love it so much and we're so passionate. But this does conclude our webinar for today. First of all, I want to thank everybody, all of the audience. So everybody who is engaged, asking questions in the Q&A, keeping Matt busy, and asking those questions at the end. Thank you for helping us elevate this conversation. I want to remind you that this has been recorded and it will be on campuslisa.ucsd.edu. Tell your colleagues if they couldn't make it, they should watch it because this was a great panel. And speaking of great panel, it wouldn't have been great without our panelists. So I want to thank our panelists, definitely. Thank you again, Dan Suchy, Deanna Roussin, Ed Ruiz, Laura Fragomeni, Robin Martin, Treb Padula, Matthew Zarzeka. My name is Miguel Rodriguez, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Thank you so much. First Campus Lisa webinar. Wow.
You rock, Miguel. Just want to make sure you know that.
Hey, yo, lesson here, baby.